Hi, I'm Dan Costa, editor-in-chief of PCMag.com, and welcome to Fast Forward, where we have ongoing conversations about living in the future. This is a special South by Southwest 2018 edition of Fast Forward. We're talking to some filmmakers, some technologists, some business leaders about really the future of technology in the digital space. I have one of those pioneers with me today, Nonny de la Peña. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are a journalist, a filmmaker, a virtual reality pioneer. You're also the CEO and founder of Emblematic Group, which is a production company that helps make VR, AR, both hardware and experiences. But you're a journalist, and it's not a gaming application. You've got a sort of a linear journalistic background, and you define yourself as an immersive journalist. I was hoping you could just explain a little bit about what that means, what it entails, and when you became an immersive journalist.
So, really, things dated back from, I was a correspondent for Newsweek, I made doc films, but I was always teaching myself to code. Ended up first building a virtual Guantanamo Bay prison in Second Life, based on a big part of a documentary I'd done, and then went on to build experiences that were fully embodied, like the one I took to Sundance in January 2012, called Hunger in Los Angeles. And that was the first VR piece at Sundance. And it put you on scene at a food bank when there was a really long line and a man with diabetes didn't get food in time. His blood sugar dropped too low and he collapsed into a coma. So, for me as a journalist, I was always trying to take people places. And I was particularly interested in taking people places where they should connect in stories that they couldn't otherwise get to. It seemed like virtual reality was the first time that I could literally transport somebody in an embodied way to a story. So in that case, we put you, there were no GoPro cameras, so everything is digitally recreated, and you're standing on the sidewalk, which is, we went and took photos and then used Photoshop and other things to recreate the actual sidewalk where this event happened, and you're standing there when this man collapses in front of you. So when that went to Sundance, we just didn't know how people would react. And people were crying and bawling, and we were like, oh man, there's something real here.
And this was 2012. It was a pretty low resolution experience, a little blocky, very artificial. You wouldn't think that it's like it was simulated, but it was based on a real story and a very simple one you summarized in 2 sentences. But watching people experience it and watching even just the video online, you can see the visceral reaction people had, which is much different than just reading a story or the account of what happened in the newspaper or online. I think it's immediately apparent that there's something there that is a new form of storytelling.
So, again, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe the reactions. And that was it. Then my journey was kind of made for me, and I've been pursuing ways to make the content more realistic. Think about when do we use CG, when do we use photographic elements. What I concentrate on is different than 360 video. We do 360 video, which is you're just shooting with cameras all the way around out. But what I like is, making you feel like you can move around, because with 360 video, it's video, so you can't ever get any closer to the image. But when we're using stuff like photogrammetry, we're taking lots and lots and lots of pictures and then creating a fully volumetric scene that is like we experience the real world. I mean, this is not flat, this is not in a box, this is spatial, otherwise you'd fall. You're sitting on something that's got depth and breadth and etc. So that's the way that I think stories are going to be told in the future. I mean, we've got the Minecraft generation, growing up, right? They're used to having digital selves and be able to move around. Why do they want a flat website? They're not going to want that.
It's also, you've sort of isolated all these different experiences and looked for stories that require a sense of presence and a sense of experience. Can you talk about some of the other, and they're intense. Like you have an intense body of work. Can you talk a little bit about how you identify what stories you want to tell?
So, yeah, I've done everything from on Syrian refugees and putting you on a street in Syria when a bomb goes off. I mean, there's a community that's really not understood well in the United States, so that was important to try to find some ways for people to connect. To a story in which 2 sisters try unsuccessfully to rescue a 3rd sister from a fatal attack by an ex-boyfriend, using real audio, because both those sisters had called 911. 3 women a day are killed by their partners or former partners in America. You know, on 40% of homeless youth come from LGBTQ. That's another project we went into where incredible audio let us make a piece around a kid who comes home and finds that he's being subject to a religious intervention, and then they assault him. He's thrown out and becomes homeless. So these cases are all very powerful moments, but they represent something larger. They represent refugees. They represent kids, homeless kids. They represent, you know, this major domestic violence story. So typically that's what the stories are. They're a microcosm. Here at South by, we have a really amazing climate change piece, which uses some of the most high-end tech we can now, like photogrammetry, and you are standing on a glacier, and you are there as the glacier recedes. And it demystifies the science. I think that's important.
And I think that the interesting thing about your work too is that you're not just recreating experiences, you're actually incorporating real life footage, real life audio, so that you've got not only the facts of the story, but you've got these elements that are pulled from real life, and then you have the virtual layer that's really going that last step and actually making you a part of the story. It elicits an emotional response in a way that just watching a film or reading an article generally doesn't. Like, how hard is it to make these stories? Is this, you know, anybody can grab a camera now and a GoPro and make a movie and take it home and cut it on their PC. How hard is it to do this?
Well, with 360 video, there's a lot of tool sets out there that are not dissimilar from, you know, cutting yourself. You just are cutting a bunch of cameras. And there's a lot of auto stitching going on. The actual gear itself can still be a little bit cost prohibitive. Now, when you get into volumetric capture, it gets to be, you know, to do humans, we need to go onto a stage either provided by 8i, which is a great partner of ours, or like Microsoft has a reality capture stage now too. But the interesting thing is that with photogrammetry, which is photorealistic, spatial volumized, you know, is that a word, volumized? Volumetric places, all you need is a DSLR. I mean, you can even use your mobile phone camera. You just have to take a lot of pictures and you paint the whole thing, and then you put it into something like Autodesk Reality Capture, and it'll spit out the volumetric model for you. Now, there's places that need cleanup, and that's a ZBrush skill. So that's what's kind of one of the things that holds you back. And then if you actually want the content to flow, you need to build in a game engine. So indeed, the steps are still harder, but you know, making a good film still requires a lot of bodies.
It's also a good indication of where the jobs in the film industry could be in the future. Where
definitely.
These are places where we're going to need more talented people to actually do this kind of stitching going forward.
People ask me, like, what's a good place for people to start making money? I'm like, get out there and start learning to do photogrammetry, because, you know, any camera can make it. You just have to learn how to clean it up a little bit, and you know, we start looking at Getty Images of the future is going to have volume.
Do you, so what's your opinion on the state of the technology? Like, we were waiting for VR for a very, very long time. Now we've got consumer level VR at a variety of price points that people can go out and buy. But it's, you know, the technology came out a couple of years ago. I don't know that the hardware has progressed super fast in the last year and a half. But what's your take on sort of the state of consumer VR and what's necessary to take it to the next level? So
I would say that I've seen a couple headsets in the last few weeks that have blown my mind. And they really are getting better faster. Here's the really cool thing, is that part of the reason why I think the headsets haven't sold as much is because there hasn't been enough content, and it's just been the distribution system. It's just been a little too, you know, high of a hurdle to get over. But with 5G coming out, suddenly you won't have to have all that information in your headset, right? Your headset will be just like your phone, and all the data will be streamed to you the same way 4G sends you data for your phone now. But it'll be volumetric. So I saw at Qualcomm in the research labs last week, one of their headsets is all based on edge computing. Super cool. You're walking around volumetric with this light little thing on your face, untethered, and sent to you from data being streamed from other, you know, out of their 5G system versus having to wear this stuff in your head and being tethered to a computer.
The tether is a huge thing. Like, I mean, we were waiting for VR to come out, and we were so excited to get it, but it really does tie you down, and because it constantly, literally connects you to the real world and keeps you from going from that last step. And we've seen some great demos of the beginning of that untethered experience, but Qualcomm's obviously got a lot of incentive to make sure we get it right.
I used to, when I used to have to 3D print my own headsets before you could walk around, I actually was sort of a step back, because I had to go back to the Tether, because we used to make them with HDMI transmitters, so we were wireless, because I couldn't stand that cable anymore. But at the same time, we were hooked up to something like 22 motion tracking cameras, so it wasn't that much easier, because we had to transport all this gear in order to be able to show people experiences. We don't really do hardware anymore, thank God. We really concentrate on the content.
So how worried are you about the unethical applications of these technologies? Generating an emotional response in your work, obviously it's clear to see that there's a public interest in that, but generating emotional responses can also be used for nefarious purposes. Is that something that, have you seen any of that so far, and are you worried about it happening in the future? There's
no doubt that print has been used for propaganda and video and film. And we've recently seen, of course, the use of bots and other trolls for manipulating things like Twitter and Facebook. So this is not a concern that should be taken lightly. Additionally, I've seen some really interesting tech where we can take audio and splice it up, and then the video will follow suit, and that's pretty extraordinary.
It's uncanny.
Yeah.
How you can literally cut one conversation and turn it into a different conversation.
That's right.
And generate a smooth video that is, like, you would be hard pressed to tell that that's not an original video.
So we're going to need tools to think about that, and the best tool is critical thinking. We have to teach people, particularly starting in junior high, critical thinking. They believe the fake news sources more than anybody, and we need to give them the understanding that they can take back into the real world, where they question where they're getting the information from.
I would suggest the junior high kids are probably more skeptical and more savvy than a lot of the 50-somethings that are seeing their Facebook feeds and not checking their sources. But that makes me an optimist, I guess.
I believe that too. I've sat with my teenage son, and he wants to know where the information, the facts. I sat with my teenage son, and I will cite a statistic at him, and he's like, "Okay, where's the information? Where's the source?" Right? Like,
that's great.
And it's great. It's great. So let's hope that we see more of that. But a Stanford University study seemed to indicate the opposite. So I hope you and I are right, and that study has got some flaws.
It's also where the sources of news, like, my son's 21, his news source for the last 10 years has been YouTube. Like, he finds things on YouTube and he says, this happened because I saw a YouTube video of it. And he's grown out of that a little bit, but I had conversations with him about all sorts of wild conspiracies that just because he saw a video on YouTube, he thought that that was the truth. And he needed to be educated out of that. So I think that, we have a responsibility as parents to sort of help the kids clear that hurdle.
And we've just not really given teachers the tool sets that they need, because for the teachers, these are new technologies. Yeah. So we have to train them, and then we let them train the kids. I mean, we've got to all participate in this, trust and democracy go hand in hand. And right now, trust in American institutions is at an all-time low. And so in order to restore that, I think we need to use all the potential creation tools that are available, whether it's VR or whether it's print. In some ways, our piece that's here, Greenland Melting, which takes you along for a journey with NASA scientists, doing very simple things like dropping a tube down the back of the airplane, so it'll go into the water and measure heat. You're like, oh, I could see myself doing that. Now I understand how that works. And suddenly it demystifies the science. And it's not some scientist in his office making up climate change data. So it took our virtual reality piece where we put you there that actually can break through fake and false information. So that's interesting too. You have to think that this can be used both ways. It's not just that it can trick people into thinking something is real, but it can also educate people about truth.
So I want to ask you the questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. Is there a technology trend that concerns you and that keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I worry the way that we've devalued information. I have a good friend who, quantum physicist who grew up in Russia, and describes how murky and muddy information became because nobody could tell what was true and what isn't. And that's something where we've got false news spreads much faster than real news, and or fake stories spread much faster than real stories. That just came out, and by some really interesting MIT researchers that I'm on a commission with Knight Foundation and Aspen Institute commission with, and what does that mean? That means that we as humans have got to think about being kind to each other and looking at whether something is fake or false, and why do we have to spread the bad stuff? Why can't we think about what we're doing too? I mean, we've got to somehow take a step back and trust in each other a little bit more, and so that keeps me up. And I do wish my son wasn't on his phone the whole time.
Yeah, that is. I was reading a report where somebody was doing a poll, and they surveyed a bunch of fifth graders, and they said, how many of you's parents think that you are addicted to technology? And they all raised their hands. And then they said, so how many of you think your parents are addicted to technology? And they all raised their hands. So they did learn this by watching us, but it's definitely an issue.
Believe me, I know. I work so hard, and I'm coming here, and I've got to get my talk ready, and it's like, okay, do I let my son game so I can get my talk ready, or do I spend time with him, right? And so I don't deny my role, particularly as somebody who's such an advocate of new technologies.
Is there a technology that you use every day that still inspires wonder? An app, a gadget, a service, anything?
Yeah, my electric toothbrush.
All right. I think that's the first electric toothbrush we've gotten on the show.
Oh man, it changed my life.
Yeah.
I love my electric toothbrush.
Okay. So if people want to follow you and want to watch your movies, how can they find you online?
So I'm emblematicgroup.com. You can find all of our content, or if you even look up Nonny, in NY and Immersive Journalism, you'll find lots of stories about us.
Excellent. Nonny, thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Really nice to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Yeah.
That's Fast Forward for today. Thanks for joining us. If you want to see back episodes of this show, you can find them on PCMag.com. You can find them on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, anywhere fine podcasts are given away for free. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you in the future.